Coming up this week on the Digital Lifestyle Show 935, Gary's here and we can talk about the new version of Windows 11. We know what it's going to be now. I don't think it's going to be Windows 12. We're going to talk about why I don't think that is and what the new version will be and some of the new features that are coming, because this week was a bit of a mega build, so we can talk about that. Dev, Canary channel and beta updates this week. We'll be talking about EVs and automatic vehicles and transfer from one driving style to another when you change cars, how to go about doing that. We've got some smart home news from Amazon Alexa and some music tech news as well. So let's get straight to Gary. Gary, good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, back again for another show, and we've got plenty to talk about because we've got news this week.
News, excellent.
You've got Windows news, I should say. We've always had news, but we've got Windows news. Actually, this was fairly quiet, but a way of sort of announcing it. Well, they didn't announce it. It's just, but if you were excited for the rumors of Windows 12, I think you might be disappointed. But we have got Windows news. We've got and SUDO news as well. We'll talk about that. So we had a few new builds and some interesting Windows 11 type stuff. I've got a article on music tech that I wanted to mention it as well. I think you've got some other news as well.
Yeah, we talk about Amazon and a couple of things. Will be paying for your Amazon Alexa services at some point.
And I also want to talk to you because I've transitioned to a automatic car, still petrol, but automatic, going from a manual. I was talking about what's the difference when you're going from a manual to an automatic, from an automatic to an EV, and how people who've got especially multiple vehicles get used to all that.
Yeah, it's some of them are very different. Actually, going from one brand of EV to another brand of EV can be different as well. So we'll talk about that. Yeah.
Right. So we'll talk about that later. So, but first, I wanted to talk about the Windows 11, and we've talked about the speculation that Windows 11, there might be Windows 12 this year, and actually, it seems to be that's not the case because we had a new build last week. I share my screen. We had a new build of Windows 11 for Windows Insiders on the Dev and Canary channel, but something that's not happened for quite some time is the Canary and the Dev channels are actually the same build numbers. So what they've done, they've bumped the Dev up to catch up to the Canary. So the build last week was 26052. And like I said, if you were on Canary, it was just a slight build jump. If you're on Dev, it was from the 2.3 something that we're in all the way up to the 2.6s. We're basically currently aligned, which that means effectively that we are testing the next version of Windows. And at some point, Canary will jump off again, which will be the next but one version, which is how it usually is. But it also means that Microsoft kind of quietly mentioned, they've buried it down here in the blog post, that the next version of Windows will be 24H2. So in the blog post, Microsoft said, this denotes that Windows 11 version 24H2 will be this year's annual feature update. So that's the update. So not Windows 12, not Windows 11 AI, or Windows 11 Copilot or whatever. It's just going to be called 24H2. That doesn't mean to say they may not introduce something else, but currently for Windows 11, that is the annual update there. So there's been lots of talk about special AI features in future versions of Windows that only work with selective certain chipsets.
Yeah.
Whether that becomes an additional thing or whether that's 25H2. We're looking sort of 18 months into the future, maybe. I don't know. But anyway, that means this year, 24H2 is the update. Which makes sense, but it's not. It's just that there was a lot of rumors, but we're sticking with this. I'm sticking with this 24H2. So I can see why they haven't done it. Windows 12, if it called it Windows 12, it would be just a marketing label, but it does mean that it means there's multiple versions of Windows. I mean, Windows 10 is still in support till next year as well, so it would almost mean 3 versions of Windows out and something else. But this, of course, doesn't mean to say that Windows 12 might not be a thing that they announce later in the year, because that's just saying this Windows 11 is 24H2, but I don't believe there will be another OS this year that's a 24H2, and everything will be in there. So yeah, so that's what they'll be for this year, and you can see it when you go into the version thing. So that's what we'll be testing now, and I guess we'll be testing this till the summer, and then that'll get released later on in the year. So I can tell you what's in this big. Well, I can tell you what's not in there, which was mentioned a few weeks ago. Windows Mixed Reality is not in the build, and if you've got Windows Mixed Reality and you plug, it just won't work with this 24H2. So if you're a Windows Mixed Reality user still using it, then it's not going to work, and I think you're going to have to stay on 23H2. So I don't know how long you've got. A year. They say it's supported because you can use a long-term version and whatever, but I think if you're just a regular Windows user, you're going to get forced onto 24H2 at some point later this year, aren't you?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so it's a bit interesting that, because basically they're saying that it's totally obsolete now. It doesn't once you lose the ability to use Steam, you can't use those headsets at all.
Yeah,
which is a bit sad, really.
Yeah,
I wonder if someone can actually come up with a third-party type driver for it to keep it going. But
yeah, I mean, they mentioned 2026 a few times in the blog post, didn't they, that you couldn't download the Windows Mixed Reality thing, but if it says, in fact, it says that existing mixed reality devices will continue to work, but I don't know what, if you get a brand new machine, you're not going to be able to plug your new headset into it because there's nothing to download. I'm not quite sure which is clear on that, but it doesn't work in this version, but they're saying it's going to work supported till 2026. So maybe it'll download some components, but I'm not quite sure how that's not that clear from this, is whether if you do a clean machine, then it's not going to work. So yeah, it just seemed, I mean, basically, if you're a Windows Mixed Reality user, then you just better stick with what you've got, and that's it. But yeah, you may be able to download it, like you said, from a third party. It does seem a shame, but I guess that number of users on that are quite slim now. But if you've had one, you've got one of those headsets, it's a real shame, especially with all the stuff about VR and everything else with Apple. It's a shame it's gone. But anyway, there you go, it's gone, and that's that. But what we have got is SUDO on Windows. So what is SUDO, and why is that interesting, or why is that important?
Yeah, well, I mean, SUDO is very much something which is used in the Linux world, and Unix world, and it's basically a way of elevating yourself to an admin temporarily to run sort of admin level type commands, just by prefixing with sudo. But then when you come off, when you come out of using sudo, you're back to being a normal user. So it's a way of doing admin things very explicitly, I guess. So you're not stuck in, you're not staying in admin mode. It's a bit interesting, because we've had run as admin in Windows for a long time. I don't quite understand why we need something different, but I
always find it when I might be doing some, it's not very often, but maybe you do something like, with the example I always use is like routing, IP routing or something. You maybe doing some pings and some trace routes, and you think, I'll add a static route, and you've been doing all this in the command prompt, and then you do your route add, blah blah blah, you put your IP address in, press enter, and it says you don't have permissions to this. So then you've got to go back to run the command line, and instead you can just.
So that's a good use case where you're midway through doing something, and I would probably just. How would you actually do that? You can't really do it any other way, can you?
Yeah, in the past, I would open another command prompt window with admin, copy the command over, paste it in.
Yeah, you'd have to copy it and make sure you're in the same working directory and all that sort of stuff.
So it's quite handy, and I think like I said, it's a very Linuxy thing, and but yeah, I found it useful for that. But you don't have to have that method of working either. When the commands in Windows, you've got 3 options actually. You can have it in a new window, or you can have it with so it runs with input disabled. So you can run a command and then nothing can get interacted with it, and you can run it in line, which is the one that I use, that sort of inline one. So, so then you don't lose where you are in the directory structures and everything else. And then when you get to you've run that sudo IP root whatever add or whatever you've done, and then the next line you're back to the non-elevated command prompt, which is supposedly safer than starting the whole procedure off with an elevated command prompt right at the beginning. Of course, that's not where I usually just forget and end up mid things. But yeah, it's more for security, isn't it? That you start in the lowest security levels and only elevate for that one command rather than completely in that elevated thing all the time. But it's quite a good idea, and I think it's actually open source, isn't it? The SUDO thing as well, which is quite interesting. So. Yeah, so anyway, you can you just in this build you can go to and pick it up and choose that option. So I thought it's quite a nice addition. It was one of those things that not everybody will use, but it's handy. And if you've not seen it, when you do the sudo whatever the command is, it obviously needs the privileges, so it pops up with the Windows privileges, the authentication screen, and you can yes or no that as well. So it still requires that elevation command. So somebody can't just write a script file that runs under sudo and that's how old things viruses used to work, wasn't it? Malware used to spread. So it still requires that interaction with it as well. So that was good to see. So the other thing that added was improved hearing aid support, so which is great. So there's some configurations for that, and also a improved mic test utility as well. So you can do some additional mic testing. Also in there is a nice little thing in Copilot, which actually makes something for Copilot, which actually makes quite sense. If you highlight some text and copy it to the clipboard, then the Copilot icon sort of has a little notification, and then you can go over to that, and then it has some actions on it that will, I think there's explain, send to chat, there's some others, there's one for images as well, there's a slightly different one. So it has a context aware to what you put on the clipboard to interact with Copilot. So I think primarily you can select some text like that, and then it's the same as doing the Ask Copilot, I suppose, where you can do send to, but there's a couple of different options on there. So I can imagine them improving that and making that more context on it.
It seems odd that it's actually a different separate pop-up. You kind of think, well, you got the Ask Copilot pop thing in there already. Why not we just have more options in there? It just seems a little bit odd, but
maybe
there's probably a technical reason for that.
Yeah, and maybe it's also getting you to get to that practice of doing things and just going to Copilot for assistance rather than individual menus. So maybe the browser has one set of menus, Excel has a different set of menus. They're all these functions could be in one area. I mean, there's only a few things it does at the moment, but I imagine that as they improve it does more and more. So maybe that's the kind of thing. So maybe if you can, I don't know, you can almost do most stuff, can't you? But you can see an image there, you can search, maybe you can have it as a backdrop or do a search for it, or whatever. So they can add sort of things into there. So that's quite interesting as well. They've done some work on the energy saving as well, so the little icons in that have changed. I think they made filtering out uncommon things in Windows. Now this is this is an old thing, and I'm quite interested about this one. So they said in this build that Windows filters out uncommon items when you try and add Bluetooth, and you can go to advanced, and then you can add the extra device. You can search for extra devices at sort of advanced section. So they said, starting with this build, we're removing that option, and use some new changes. So I'm not quite sure what those will be. So those uncommon ones I do know include some of the MIDI controllers that you can get on Bluetooth.
Yeah.
So the Korg MIDI
Yeah.
controller is one of them that doesn't show up when you do it a normal search.
So I think this is actually, I do actually think this is better, because basically what it's going to do now is it's still going to filter, but you'll have a show all devices button
Yeah.
available or somewhere on that screen. So if there are additional devices, you can just click on that and it will then show all the devices,
Yeah, rather than going through to the advanced.
Rather than having to do a specific advanced search, it will always search
Yeah.
for them. And I think that's actually a better approach. I think that's
I know quite a few people I've seen on forums of people saying my MIDI controller no longer works with Windows because it doesn't show up and you have to go to advanced. Perhaps this is a bit more intuitive.
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah. There was some other bits and pieces in there. There's a new color management screen, although mine builds didn't get this. I still had the old one. There was another one as well, which I can't see on here. I saw somewhere is especially for gaming, there's some machine learning on resolutions, on display resolutions as well. So I think that's going to improve the resolutions for gaming as well.
Yeah, there's some sort of like upscaling they've built in on that. The registry editor would have been useful years ago. I tend not to use the registry editor very much these days, but you can now search in a subtree, sort of like rather than searching the whole of the registry, you could say I just want to search local machine, for example, rather than searching all the keys, and it will then find that. Or you could even search within the Windows folder for something, which I think is actually quite a good thing.
Yeah, so you just have to, if you were looking for something, you got to if you're going through everything, you got F3, and it keeps finding the things you don't want. Yeah.
So
and there's also Power Grid Forecast API.
Yeah, this is quite an interesting.
Using this one.
Well, not many at the moment, but because it's only really just been out there. But I could see it being something which could get mandated eventually, because it's basically all about saving. Ensuring you're using renewable energy, using the lowest cost energy. So say, I was thinking this was something like if you were data mining, for example, if you do, or you're doing one of the sort of you're mining for pseudocurrency, you might want to run that at the cheapest time for you to run it, which is when your local grid is going to be using renewables, and you get the discount. And this will allow you, it basically predicts when that's going to happen, so you can sort of start your run to be optimizing that point. It's a bit like when you charge your EV overnight on the cheapest rate. It's some of those systems are now predicting when that's going to be and using it. I think it's an interesting idea, and because PCs, I mean, certainly some of the PCs which are used for some of the more intensive AI stuff, and also for some of the data analysis stuff, do use a lot of electricity, and are very costly, and potentially they don't need to run all the time. They could run at peak time, so off peak time.
Obviously, yeah.
So it's definitely an interesting one.
It does make sense. So actually, this is quite a big build. This thing. There was another one there which has been from mentioned in a blog post about QR codes for joining Wi-Fi, but that's actually an older thing that they've added back in. There's quite a lot of changes in there, and that's just the changes in this Canary build. So if you're on dev, there's actually a whole host of things. In fact, Microsoft have them on there: energy saving, 7 zips, and things like that. So there's quite a lot of changes. So this update 24H2, under the hood, there's going to be quite a lot of changes. I don't know whether there'll be big headline UI changes, but we'll have to see. But also, I think this is going to be tied up with the Snapdragon processors as well. So, So it was quite a big update, which is why they held the builds back, I think, a couple of weeks ago. I kind of mentioned that last week, didn't we? That they were perhaps holding some things back. And now we know why they were doing that, to sync that up. Incidentally, there was also a beta build as well last week, but that was just a bit of Copilot and a bit of start menu changes, so not much on there. So an interesting week for Microsoft builds, and now we know what we're testing for the rest of the year.
Indeed, a lot of AI in there.
Yeah.
And you may have heard that Amazon are investigating improving their AI on Alexa, but you're likely going to have to pay for it, from what I understand. So
Right.
this is the Alexa Plus service, or they've been talking about, which is supposed to make Alexa a lot more conversational and improve the the ability to. I mean, it's particularly useful for smart home users because you can combine commands and have natural language conversations, but even more so than you currently can. Hopefully, it'll start understand you more than it does now. Although I'm slightly concerned with the quality of some of the more recent hardware, because they've definitely, the microphones and things in the devices have definitely declined over the years. But it does sound like this is going to be a subscription-based service, and not surprisingly, because AI is expensive to run. If you use any of the machine language services, that they cost, and there's a lot of cost involved in them. So I'm not surprised that they would want to charge for this, but there's a lot of people up in arms about this, obviously, because they think, oh, it's going to break my Alexa and I'm not going to be able to use it without paying for it. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think the stuff we've currently got will remain. Although, having said that, that hasn't been the case necessarily. It's with Amazon services. I don't know if you saw that Fire TV started putting adverts on recently.
Yeah, Amazon Video has adverts on now.
Yeah, adverts on Prime Video, and that's. I mean, obviously, that's one sort of negative, and you possibly could live with that. But they've also, as part of that change, they've taken away Dolby Atmos. Unless you pay for the so Dolby Atmos and Dolby Vision HDR are no longer available on the free tier of the advert supported tier of Prime Video. The only way you can get them is by paying the subscription for the ad-free version, which is £2.99 a month. Well, $2.99 in the States, the typical UK tax.
Yes, yeah.
Why that should be different? I can't even think of any reason why the cost should be different in the UK. I mean, it's just I think it's easier for them to do a round figure, but yes. So $2.99 for that, and then you'll get your Atmos on your HDR back. So they do sometimes take features away and put them behind the paywall. So I don't think they're going to do that with Alexa. It sounds like from what they've said, they're not going to. There's also rumours that this new Plus thing will be bundled with Prime, so it might be a new Prime benefit. And if you haven't got Prime, you don't get the Plus as well.
Right.
So that's one sort of possibility. But even so, it's. I mean, we know that they're not making money on the Alexa devices. I mean, that was always the case. They didn't make money on the Alexa devices because the point was to try and suck you into using their services so they could sell you things. But the problem was that the idea of using those devices to sell you things just hasn't really worked. Most people ignore the sales prompts and don't buy things using. I mean, voice purchasing has not really taken off at all. So I think they're now, it's now very much a cost heavy department, and it's losing money basically. So they need to figure a way of actually getting some revenue from it to make it worthwhile. So I think it will have a cost attached to having new features. Hopefully it's only the new features and nothing existing, but time will tell.
Yeah, they do like to take away sometimes. It's like the I can understand why. Like you said, the shop in my device came up and said I needed new batteries in my dimmer switch. My new dimmer switch is up on the wall. And it said, would you like me to order them now? And of course, I just said no, and I'll sort it out. In fact, I've actually got some, I think, so I'll just go and get one. But you can see where, in some executive's mind a few years ago, that would have been, yes, please order them. And that would have been their idea of doing some selling. But I don't think it quite works like that. I don't know anybody that sort of purchases like that, but I'm sure some people do. But so you can see why that they've had to look at these other services. I just hope that the competition from Google keeps them, Google Home and Apple, that keeps them not putting these too much behind a paywall, so that there's some with the competition, it means that there's some incentive for them to do it free, because they have got a great platform with it, Alexa, and people use it and people like using it as well. So but like, they don't use it for things that make Amazon money. They use it for play whatever radio station is, or I I tend to only use mine to control the TV and to control my lights. That's all I use it for at the moment. But maybe if there was some advanced stuff in there, especially if you could do some sort of voice what it or if and that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
Alexa, when the last person leaves the house, if it's below this temperature, will you shut the window or whatever? Alexa, stop.
Yeah, mine just burst into life here as well.
Yeah.
But and that's actually one of the things they have suggested would come into the plus version. That conversational ability to create a routine would be possible, or setting a timer which actually then triggered a smart home event would be possible, and all that sort of stuff. So I mean, for me, that might actually be worth paying a small subscription for, but it's just, yeah, for a lot of people it wouldn't be worthwhile at all.
Yeah. So if they offered it as a Prime thing, that might be quite good though, because in these days of people, people look at now they're doing adverts on Amazon Video. They're looking at what you're getting for your money. So perhaps putting an extra, I suppose, benefit in there would be pretty good.
Yeah, we'll see.
Now, the conversation we had earlier about EVs and gearbox in cars and things like that got me thinking. I wanted to ask you. So I've recently changed from a manual car for the last 30 odd years. It is. I had an automatic probably 20 years ago to an automatic recently. I was loads of traffic driving home tonight, and the automatic was brilliant because it's auto start stop, auto handbrake, auto everything. So that so it was so much easier to drive, and so it made a real difference. But what I did find is I still tensing my left leg on the rest pedal on the where was the clutch on my old
it will go away eventually, and the reverse is true. When you come back to driving a manual, you brake with the wrong foot. It becomes a real problem to do that. But yeah, I mean, it's equally strange when you go from an EV to an automatic.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you about, because how do you manage that, especially if you've got perhaps multi vehicles where your car is this one, maybe your spouse's car is a different model or manufacturer.
Yeah, and that's equally true on EVs as well. I mean, if you move from an EV which has creep, so an automatic gearbox, when you take your foot off your foot off the brake, it starts to creep forward. Unless it's got auto hold, which might hold it at that point.
Mine does, yeah.
And then you have to touch the accelerator.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of EVs are in that latter category where it's auto hold. Well, I mean, certainly with one pedal driving, the idea is that you take your foot off and it comes to a complete halt, and then you put your foot down and it starts moving again. And that, if you go from one which hasn't got creep to one which has got creep, it can be very disconcerting.
Yeah.
you don't know what's going to happen when you take your foot off the brake. And I think auto hold is becoming more common now, and even manual cars can have auto hold. But yeah, certainly, and obviously an automatic gearbox is still a gearbox, and you've got kick down and all that sort of stuff which comes in on auto gearbox, which you don't have on an EV because you don't need it, because you've got instant torque. So you've got all your torque available all the time in a manual, whereas in an automatic you have to kick. In a geared car, you need the kick down to get the full torque, and that's where the difference comes in. And the first time I drove an EV, I very nearly drove a bit too fast because I went to do kick down to change gear, and of course I didn't need to, and it just put the full acceleration on, and that was a quick car. So so those things are just, and it's a learning experience now, and it's a learning experience moving between EVs, particularly around the regen braking. Virtually every car regenerates in a different way, so taking your foot off the accelerator is an interesting experience in a lot of cars, because you never know whether it's going to slow down. It's not going to slow down. If it's one pedal driving, it might slow down completely. If it's some of the ones with lighter regen, it might slow down a bit. I mean, I was driving the ID Buzz mini van, which I mentioned software on last week, and when you when you normally drive it, it hasn't got very much regen at all. But you can actually change the gear into a B mode, which gives you engine, like equivalent of engine braking, but that's a regen option. Now, obviously, on a geared car, you do get regen braking, because on a manual, when you take your foot off the accelerator, depending on the gear you're in, you can actually slow down using the gears. And you can actually do that with automatics as well. A lot of them have flappy paddles to allow you to actually reduce the gears. In an automatic, in an electric car, you don't tend to have that, but you have the regen as an option. So there's lots of different things about that. I mean, I'm a strong believer in automatic cars. I think for enthusiasts who like to drive manuals, I've got no problem at all with that. If you know how to drive a manual and you're comfortable in it, and it doesn't cause you, and you're not stuck in traffic a lot of the time, and you're not driving around towns, it's okay. Yeah, it's fine. But I honestly believe if we all drove automatics, there'd be a lot less accidents, because it takes a lot less concentration to drive an automatic than it does to drive a manual. For most people. And I think certainly in town it takes, and using the clutch all the time, keeping all that stuff, it's a lot. It's a high degree of mental acuity needed to do that, and some people are very good at it, and it's a skill, and I get that people want to be able to maintain that, and I'm quite happy driving stick shifts, as the Americans would call them, or manuals, and we call them over here, and I've got no objections to enthusiasts wanting to do that. That's absolutely fine with me. But I think there are certainly there are known to be a number of accidents caused by people actually looking down to see which gear they're in, and stuff like that. So I know that's less of a problem these days, because most manuals have an indicator on the dashboard now saying which gear you're in. But yeah, it's but being in the wrong gear, stalling, all those sort of things, I just think you just don't get with automatics and electric cars.
I'm one of those, probably those terrible recent converts. For years I've always, I said about 20 years ago I had an automatic for a couple of years, and then went back to manuals, and I was like, I always want my manual. But then this car only came with the automatic, even though it's got the sports gearbox on it. It's a automatic sports gearbox, but it drives so well, and it's such a great experience that it's well worth it. And of course then you get the other benefits, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, I know there is an argument that manuals can be more fuel efficient if driven properly, and a skilled manual driver can be more efficient than a normal automatic driver. But you don't have to learn anything on automatic to get the full benefit of the automatic gearbox. And in tests which I've done between myself and a normal manual driver, I've actually got better fuel economy from an automatic in the past. So it's interesting, that whole concept around that, and obviously it doesn't apply with electric cars. Although I think it's Toyota are actually trying to introduce a manual gearbox for electric cars, just so people who like that experience can have a manual gearbox.
So is it like SUDO software type thing?
SUDO software in thing. So which is crazy. I mean, that's absolutely crazy. It's But
I suppose if you're if someone's thinking of going for an EV and you're on a manual petrol or diesel or whatever, I suppose actually an auto petrol diesel is almost like a halfway house to then going full automatic with an EV, isn't it? But that, I guess eventually it'll get to the point where manual gearboxes with petrol cars will be for enthusiasts only. You can see that trajectory. EVs will be what most people drive, and then you'll have the enthusiasts with these other type vehicles with other stuff. And I mean, even in it's obvious which system works best, because if in Formula One they used to have automatic, and then they banned it because they wanted the drivers to have the control of it. They didn't do it because the drivers were better changing than the software was, and this is 20 years ago when Williams were doing the active gearbox type stuff. So it's obvious that that's software can do it better than a human.
Yeah, and in this day and age, with machine learning, software can definitely do it a lot better than. I mean, modern electronically controlled gearboxes are probably probably better efficiency than any good manual driver is. So you have to be an exceptional manual driver to beat one. So
but it's interesting what you say about the EVs. there's a learning period of those, and when you get if you're going from a petrol to an EV,
There
you've
is,
got
and
a transition
unfortunately, there's
period.
very little handover done on these things. I mean, I've certainly seen this on test drives recently because the people I'm doing test drives with, we don't necessarily know I'm a experienced EV driver, and it's usually just, oh, here's the car, here's the keys, go off and drive it, sort of thing. And if you're coming to an EV for the first time, you wouldn't have a clue. I mean, some of them, it's you don't even know how to switch them on because they actually. So, for example, Volkswagen EVs, you sit as soon as you sit in the seat, it's on.
Mhm.
And then you can put it in gear and start driving off. And people, I mean, I've seen people going for test drives and looking, where's the button? Where's the key? How do I start this thing? And it's already started effectively. So yeah.
Yeah, I suppose it's something that'll be less of an issue as people get more used to them, and there'll be less people. I mean, they'll get to the point where some people have never driven a non-EV. There'll be people passing the test now that have never driven a manual car with a petrol engine.
Yeah.
It'll get to that point where it gets to the point where it's something that only old people drove.
Yeah.
It's like manual started on a car or whatever, or having someone walk out in front of your car with a red flag. Know.
Yeah, I mean, talk about EVs. I mean, obviously, there's been a lot of very coordinated negative press around EVs recently, which has very adversely affected the second-hand market. But that's actually a real win if you're in the market for a used EV, because there are some real mega bargains to be had at the moment. So my old iPace is at places on the market at the moment. The person who obviously got it after me has got it on for 22k, £22,000 for a Jag I-Pace, which is actually in pretty condition, and that has and the other thing is with EVs, it's almost counterintuitive because we're so used to looking for low mileage cars with petrol cars, but a 4-year-old low mileage EV is probably a worse bet than a 4-year-old mid-range or even high mileage EV, because low mileage EVs, problems happen on EVs in the first 20,000 miles if they're going to happen normally. And equally the charge profile. So if you've got someone who tootles the shops once a week but leaves their car plugged in all the time when it's home, that's going to have more adversely affect the battery than someone who's done 40,000 miles in a year. It's just potentially, anyway, depending how they've done it. So actually a medium to high or very high mileage car in petrol terms is actually a better investment in EV terms. Yet that's not really factored in the pricing, because the whole used car market still works on those old. If it's got 50,000 miles, it must be more cheaper than one with 4,000 miles on the clock. So there's some really good bargains to be had out there at the moment. And the really luxury EVs are the ones which have plummeted the most, as is normal with cars. I mean, that tends to be the case. But yeah, so if you're in the market at the moment, there's some good deals to be had.
Yeah, it's definitely worth looking around. And just actually remind us while we're on there. So remind us of your channel.
Yeah, so the EV Owner channel on YouTube, and regularly on there also host the EV Driver Show, which will be getting another edition fairly shortly. And recently I've done a review of the EV9, which I mentioned a couple of weeks back on there, and it's about, hopefully in a couple of weeks time I'll actually have a short review of the ID Buzz on there as well. So I'm going to get some bits on there, but yeah, there's a few bits and pieces coming up.
Excellent.
Oh, well, actually, one thing I did want to talk about as well. My EV6 I've just done a software update, and it has over-the-air updates available to it. But I looked at it the other day and said, why is it not over-the-air updating? This one's due, and it said that the subscription for that had been expired, and they're actually starting to charge for you to have over-the-air updates, which I think is a bit mean, because they actually advertised it without having over-the-air updates. But regardless of that, they want 80 quid a year for 2 updates. which seems an excessive amount. I know they've got a host of the stuff and everything else, which is expensive, but that does seem a bit pricey.
Yeah.
So, especially when I can go to their site, download it myself, and not do the update.
And don't they run the issue then of people say, I'm not paying that, I won't do the updates, and then they're driving around with cars, unpatched cars, which is technical risk, security risk, and everything else.
Yeah. So it's an interesting one. It's a really interesting one.
It's like the opposite way of Microsoft's thinking, isn't it? How they're pushing you to be on the latest builds.
Yeah,
it's quite interesting. But I think they're still, all the car industries are still working on these models, aren't they, of how they're selling new vehicles, EVs, and just cars in general with services. You know, like we talked about the BMW heated seat that you could get as a software subscription. I noticed on mine everything was included, but apart from, you can have auto headlights, auto dipping headlights, I think they're called. I think quite a few where the headlights are on full beam, but they dip when the car comes around. But it was £200 a year for that feature.
Yeah.
I thought, who pays that when you can just do it with yourself? But perhaps somebody does. But I would you have paid £200 for the vehicle extra? Well, I mean, £200, all over the 5-year lease. Would you pay £2,000 more for that? No, you wouldn't. Yeah. So it's interesting to see how they work out these models and what people are prepared to pay for.
Yeah, and technically, if you do anything like that, you're supposed to tell your insurer, because it counts as a modification to the car.
Yes. Yeah. So it's interesting way they could they put everything in, then put things on subscription service. So after a year you could decide, I do want to pay for the heated seats or whatever. Whereas you want it in the original purchase price, but then you said it's a whole minefield going down that route, isn't it? Of services for things that you own or potentially own. It's not a simple situation. There was just one other thing I wanted to mention as well for this week. I have got another tutorial out for the Korg ModWave. So this is on motion sequencing. And if you've got a ModWave, you'll know what I mean by motion sequencing. If you haven't, it might not, but you can have a listen and see what you can do. But it's a way of controlling all the parameters over time. So it's a bit like a software program for your synth, actually, but it's not like a traditional note sequencer. It does all sorts of stuff. So I've got a little video of that. So look out for that. And I've also got a 2-part video on some software music apps as well that is going to be out shortly as well. Also, I noticed as well that there's some MIDI 2 stuff from Pete Brown's got a presentation coming out in a few days on MIDI 2.0 from the MIDI Association. So we'll talk about it next week. I've not watched it yet because it's not live yet. But we will be getting Pete Brown on the show to talk about Windows MIDI and the whole MIDI stacks and communication stuff in MIDI 2.0 in Windows as well on a future show. Right, so I think that's just about everything got for this week. So where can we find you as well as your owner channel?
You can find me at Garry with 2 R's WMA, virtually on all the social medias.
Excellent. I'm at Dixon, and I've got 14-15 tracks finished now, so I'm ready to release the next one. So I'm going to release a single which will make Miami Vice fans happy. It's very Vice-like. So that should be ready by next week's show, but you can find that on thisLifestyle.com and all usual places. I've got the hyperfollow, you find everything on there. So we'll be back same time, same place next week. You can email me in at thisLifestyle.com, and we'll see you then.
Take care.